Okay, hello and welcome to 1 Minute Stories. Tuesday evenings is 7:30 p.m. is a story time. It's been like this for the last 5 weeks, and we've been taking some steps on the circle to build a circle that will help us all to become slightly better storytellers, one story at a time. And what we do on the circle is we narrate a story, reflect on it, work out the various points of it, figure out where we could possibly use it to make a point in our conversations, in presentations, in our business conversations. And I do that very soon. I will not be the only person who's narrating the stories here, working out a format where people can come and share their stories and we can learn from each other. All right. So, in the last few months, the one word that has been used the most in the context of leadership is resilience and bouncing forward. And as we are getting back to normalcy, people are getting back to offices. One of the things that I keep hearing in the contexts from most organizations and people is that we need to build emotional resilience in our teams, is what most people are saying. And that gets me thinking and got me thinking it's resilience and bouncing forward are words that are so easy to roll out of our tongue. And it got me thinking that do we really understand them? How much do we really understand the nuts and bolts of what it takes to be resilient? And that's when I thought, let me pick up these examples for the circle discussion today. So I'm going back to September 15th, 2001. It was the Larry King show. And the Larry King show of September 15, 2001 had a very special guest. His name was Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick was a CEO of an investment and brokerage firm dealing in the US securities, was based out of the New York City. And he was going to make a very powerful statement on the show. He was looking straight into the camera. It was a very solemn moment. And he said, I lost everybody in the company. I don't have money to pay their salaries today, but we will pay 25% of the profits to each of the families for the next 5 years and cover the healthcare insurance for the next 10 years. There was a lot of silence, and no one really talked, and the show just ended after that. 4 mornings earlier to this, Howard had planned to get into his office very. His son Kyle to his first day of kindergarten. So at about 9 a.m. in the morning, as the parents and teachers were enjoying the antics of the kids, Howard's driver comes running into the classroom, shouts, gasping for breath, and shouts at the top of his voice, "A plane has just hit the World Trade Center." It was 9/11. Now, Howard's office, Cantor Fitzgerald, had offices on the floors 101 to 105 in the World Trade Center, and these were just located exactly at the point of impact where the first flight AA11 crashed in at 8:46 a.m. All the 658 employees in his office died, including his own brother Gary. That was about 70% of the company. Howard Lutnick was heavily criticized in Washington Post and Wall Street Journal the next morning because of his decision to stop the salaries of the people. But he had a plan, and it was also very highly trusted by the families of the team members he had lost. He got his team together, whoever was remaining, and the next 5 years they slogged their butt off. And by 2006, the team paid out $200 million, over $200 million to the families. Not just that, he continues to run an annual relief fund that supports the families of not just his company, but 14 other firms that were wiped out in that 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center. When Howard was about 18 years of age, his father was decided to drop him on the first day of the college. He hugged him, kissed him, and his father was to go directly from the college to the hospital for his chemo treatment. And suddenly in the afternoon, Howard gets a phone call that his father died. When it was later investigated, it was revealed that the nurse who was administering the chemo to him had, by mistake, injected 100 times the dosage of the chemo medicine to his father. He and his siblings were abandoned after his father's death. It was the beginning of a lifelong fight back for Howard continuously in his life. About 7 years later, in a completely different world, in a different city, a middle aged man was walking towards the seafront opposite the Taj Mahal Hotel in Bombay. Uh, he was trying to call up his parents who were away from the country at that point of time. And as soon as his mother picked up the phone, the middle aged man his voice was crackling, but he could just manage to say this. He said, I don't think they have made it. I can't save them. It was 4 a.m. in the morning. The date was 27th of November 2008 in Bombay. The other side of the phone call was quiet for a while, but his mother figured out a way to reply to him gently. And then she said, then go and save the others. You are a very brave boy. She was gutted, but she knew that this was not the time to show it. Karambir Kang was the man. He was the son of a Sikh army general who fought in the Indo-Pak Wars of 1965 and 1971. He was also the general manager of the Taj Mumbai. So when the terrorists attacked and came in from the sea on the 26th of November evening and took over the Taj, Karambir was actually not in Taj Mahal Hotel. He had to go for a very special function in Taj Lands End in the other end of the city of Bombay. As soon as he heard it, he got into the car and started to travel back to the Taj Mahal Hotel on this side of the city. But his first thoughts to about went to his family who was staying on the sixth floor of the plush Taj suite, which was the sea facing suite, the most royal suite where his family was staying. His wife Neeti, his two sons Uday, 12 years of age, and Samar, who were 5 years of age, were staying on the sixth floor plush suite. By the time Karambir reached Taj Mahal Hotel at about 10:30 p.m., the terrorists had completely massacred and killed everyone with impunity in the lobby and were going upstairs floor by floor and wiping out people. There were 1,500 guests at that point of time and about 500 staff members. Karambir knew what was happening, but he immediately got on to the rescue operations, coordinating with the security forces as the AK-47s rattled. He started pulling out the dead bodies, putting them on the trolleys, helping the guests to evacuate and shouting instructions. And all this while, he was continuously looking at the sixth floor and hoping that some rescue would reach to his family. Uh, but about 2 a.m. in the morning, when the sixth floor started getting into a blaze, he knew that he had lost them. As soon as he made that call to his mom and he started walking back towards the hotel, Ratan Tata saw him, pulled him aside, and said, Please, please go home. I'm begging you to take off. But Karambir Kang looked into Ratan Tata's eyes and said, I won't run away. My team counts on me. The terrorists must not win. We know that the siege of Taj took about 48 hours. About 150 to 160 people died, were killed, and 300 were injured. But Karambir and his staff were there till the very end, till the last body was cleared, and the last security person had left. When Karambir was born, his mother named him Karambir. It actually translates to a person who does brave deeds, hoping that he would become a great army man. But on those 2 days, Karambir was way more than that. And I was reflecting that oftentimes we hide under the phrase act of God, but stories like this must become a trigger to make bolder choices in the life that we still have. And the second thing is that resilience and bouncing forward is not just an easy word that can come off your tongue. It's a lot tougher and a lot more grunt work and thankless than what we really need to do. Yeah, that was the point of the story.
Beautiful story, Uday. both of them. Uh, and having met some of the people who lost their families in 9/11, especially, uh, I think I can relate to some of it.
Yeah, one of the things that we work on this storytelling is one is the story itself and how did it actually land on you and what does it really mean to you at a much more deeper level. And obviously, the whole point of the story was to talk about resilience and the whole aspect of what it takes to be resilient as a leader. Thanks, Raji, for joining in. And Mahesh, thoughts?
Hi, Rajiv, are you going?
Okay, I can go first, but I am actually. Um, it's been such an emotional way Uday has told the story that having known both the incidents, I'm at loss of words right now, which is not a not a very frequent thing for me to happen. But I think the point I wanted to make was Uday, when we speak of resilience, especially from leadership context, I've still been struggling to understand, is this something that can be learned, or actually the way you have grown up in the kind of environment, what has happened around you, the entire upbringing makes some people more resilient when they grow up in any field versus if you decided to today start learning resilience, emotional one especially, will it come so easily or not? So that's the question, and I'm putting that to other people here. But story, the way you told it today, absolutely fantastic. I'm pretty emotional at this point of time.
Yeah, just to add, taking off from what Rajiv just said, I mean, this is a question that I have also asked many times, not just in resilience, in many aspects of leadership, and this is a debate that keeps going on that leadership is something that can be taught or is it something that people are born with, and it's a mixed bag for me if you look at it. I mean, some of the traits or a character of a leader uh, is also something that people are born with. But then some of these things, I think you shape up yourself as you go through the journey of leadership. Uh, More so from today's perspective. I mean, the way the world is shaping up today with the on the ground for many people. I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty around, and as leaders, I think it's important that this is a facet that one has to start building on because as leaders, you hold the responsibility of of leading your team through a very tough time, and that's possible only if they see a brave face in front. And in both the stories, if you see, I think that's what the leaders bring about, and when that happens, I think you know people get the hope and the courage to kind of move on, and the life has to move on. I mean, ultimately, some might take a few days to mourn what has happened, or some might take a longer time. But then I think the life has to go on, and for that, I think resilience is a very, very important aspect of not just leadership but everybody. But as a leader, I think it's a very, very important thing to build on.
Yeah, and so true, isn't it? And one of the things about resilience is also that we kind of equate it to a lot of things in terms of uh, how you must always be resilient or how you must not cover under pressure and how you must always bounce back. And you need to understand that uh, the story afterwards is always going to be glamorous about how someone was bouncing back. Howard Lutnick and Karambir Kang. Both these stories, if you look at it, if you just go a bit deeper, you will realize that both had choices in life that they could take easier. I mean, Howard Lutnick could always say that, okay, I'm closing this company, I can't do anything. The US could have come and taken care of the families. Karambir Kang would have said, okay, fine, my folks have gone, I don't have to do this. I'm revolting, or maybe just put pressure to just save his family, whatever. They had those options and they still took the bolder options. And that's where I think uh, I completely agree with you, Mahesh and Rajiv, that some of it is innate, but a lot of it is grunt work and that the nuts and bolts. And I think as managers and leaders, we should be very sensitive and careful about when we actually put out to our teams and say that, look, we must be resilient. We need to understand especially in the context of how people are coming back from the pandemic after the second wave, after losing a lot of people. You need to be a lot more sensitive about these things.
I
Arisudin?
mean, I know. Yeah, before
Yeah,
Harisudhan
very, very
go.
pertinent point, and useful as well. I was just going to, when you were talking, I was just thinking about what's happening in India right now, especially since March, when everything started exploding. And I mean, at the risk of sounding a bit political, a lot of people chose this time to pick political fights. And obviously, leaders or anybody else, because this was something that doesn't happen often. So nobody was really prepared. It was a good learning exercise. But at the same time, there are some people who took a step to do something about it. Instead of, just waiting for the politicians to answer their call, uh, you must have seen a lot of apps coming up which were giving real-time
True.
updates on the availability of oxygen and beds and whatnot. So, kind of a crowdsourcing effort, but people picked it up. And that is also some sort of resilience, instead of just going out and criticizing and cribbing about it, taking an action, becoming a change themselves. So, that was one great example. I mean, irrespective of their ideologies or religion or whatnot, some people started doing it, some companies started doing it. So, that was a great thing in my view.
True.
I would like.
And the listeners, once again, all part of this. I would like to please leave a message how you felt about this. The other thing is let's also remember that the point of telling the story was to work out something about storytelling. So one of the questions I'm going to post out here for you as listeners, if you can share, is uh, where in your context of a leadership journey with your teams or in your places, where do you think you would use a story, or if at all you might want to use it? How would you want to use the story? What kind of a point you might want to use the story? Please put it on the chat. It'll be so good to listen and see what happens. Yeah, Mahesh, you were saying something.
Yeah, so I was also trying to actually ask something very similar. That okay, when the story that you told today is quite heavy and deep, and you don't really have anything much to comment on beyond what you said on the resilience that shown by these two gentlemen. But if you look at it, resilience, even at a very different level, uh, we see that happening uh, in the sports field so often, and those are traits that is a part of training. I mean, there are many times that we see that teams get into difficult situations, difficult positions, and they kind of get out of it. I mean, very recent example of the French Open between Nadal and Djokovic, or even the finals that happened. So in sports, you find that these are things that professionals train on, and how do you kind of train people to develop this aspect of it through storytelling, or are there other methods in coaching that you follow? I mean, I know Rajiv and Uday, you both work in that field. Maybe that's a good input that everyone on the call would want to know.
Yeah, in fact, I'm just going to, just before responding, I'm just going to kind of read out some of the messages that have come. Aarti says that she uses stories to drive culture and core values in teams. Totally agree. That's why stories are powerful. Uh, Preeti is talking about taking action instead of cribbing is a great show of resilience. I take it that that is a huge point that you take out of the story. And the stories of success and failures both have a lot of, yeah, we often delude ourselves by telling a lot of success stories. And this is a tragic event and a failure, and both have a lot of things to talk about. Anand has been talking about when the team morale is down, targets missing, things out of control story is the biggest motivator. In fact, I've used this story, so I never tell a story on 1 minute stories or anywhere else until I've actually used it, and I'll tell you where I've used the story. I mentor a team, an FMCG company, and one of the moments where I just triggered this entire story of Howard Lutnick was the leadership in the team came to me and said, "Hey, what is the point? No matter what we are doing, nothing is happening. There is no hope." And there was such a huge amount of negativism and absolute, what is the point in trying for it kind of an attitude there. And I made the point that, look, what we need to do is to bounce back, and this is what Howard Lutnick did, and this is what Karambir Kang did. And suddenly people started questioning, hey, they had a life and death issue. We are not in that space. So can we do something? And suddenly the shift and the paradigm shift happened. Right? Rajiv, you were just saying something. Did I cut you on the when I was
No,
just talking?
I was just wanting to highlight a couple of things that you said in the last session. I was trying to really remember and pick up in terms of my own practicing of storytelling. So I think the point you mentioned last time, that a good story should have names and dates and stuff like that, I think that really made a lot of impact today also. You had all the character names and incidents, times, etc. So I was just trying to recollect one of
Yeah.
those points. And second, on a very personal note, I've been fortunate to have flown sitting next to Karamveer in one of the flights 3-4 months after the entire incident. And as a
Oh,
person, extremely, extremely humble, you won't even know the mental strength from his voice or tone or any of those things.
awesome.
But lovely
I mean,
story over there. Thank you.
yeah, and I just read out some of the messages. Dominant stories in the company drives its culture. So important to watch dominant stories. So true, Anand. And the stories the leadership tells is other stories that we need to drive. Resilience is to start doing what is possible. Yeah, and Himanshu talks about stories are a very effective way to drive analogies and make a people drive a message. Which, the thing about stories is that Himanshu and mentioned they immediately connect, and this is gives me a beautiful segue into what I want to kind of leave today's entire listeners and audience about what we could do with this story. So you could use this story, and you could always reflect the story in multiple occasions to motivate people and the way you tell it. But here is something about handling. This is a deeply emotional story, right? And one of the learnings that I've had, when you're saying a deeply emotional story, it is extremely important that you don't over dramatize it. So, yeah, you need to feel the story, which I thought I felt, and you need to live the story. But you have to also realize that this is not a performance. You can't say, uh, you can say that that guy's voice is cracking and he was shivering, but you can't do that. The thing about business storytelling is you'll broadly get about a couple of minutes to make a point, and you need to make that. That is the first one. And the second thing is always state why you're telling the story, and that is the reason I spent that 30 seconds upfront in giving